Dustin, can you hear me out in the field?
I can indeed. Good morning, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful day in Florida, and I would love to see where you're coming from. So if you put in the chat where you are, we usually have people from throughout Florida, but sometimes we have people from New York or even the UK, Virginia, all over the place. So put in that chat where you're coming from. I'd love to see that stuff. Especially when it's snow and ice in some other place, and I can just imagine you sitting there with a cup of hot chocolate, freezing, and watching us down here in Florida to give yourself some warm vibes. If this is your first time joining us for the Florida Nature Walks, the way this works is we'll take the next half an hour or so to look around. Every week I come out with my cell phone and my selfie stick and kind of wander around out in the woods and see what there is to find. We show some clips, some science clips, and we have a special guest. Today's special guest is Dr. Joan Morrison, and we'll have a little video about her later on, and then she'll be here for the question and answer at about 10 o'clock or so. Cool. So we are out on the Discovery Loop at Archbold. This is the nature trail if you come to visit Archbold. Unfortunately, our gates are still closed to the public, but when we are open, this is where you can come and walk around. It's free to visit here, and we love having people come out on the trail. So why is there a field station here in the middle of the scrub? Isn't the scrub just some kind of like ugly looking habitat of shrubs that we should just cut down and bulldoze over and put up a parking lot? No, the scrub is this amazing habitat. It's one of the rarest habitats in all of the United States. And particularly the scrub at Archbold is important because we are on the south tip of something called the Lake Wales Ridge. The Lake Wales Ridge is kind of like Florida's mountain range in the middle of the state, running north-south for about 120 miles is this big pile of sand. That's what I'm on, a big pile of sand. I'm at about 130 feet elevation right here. And it even gets up to over 300 feet in elevation. So this is the tallest part of the peninsula of Florida. And if you think about Florida, it's surrounded by the oceans, and most of Florida is very low. So if you can imagine going back in time when the ocean was higher, sometimes in the past the ocean's been higher, deeper than it is now. Other times it's been lower, shallower. And when that happens, Florida either gets much bigger or it shrinks down. And when the water is really high, it shrinks all the way down to just a few sandy islands in the middle of the state, which is where I am right now. So the scrub is this very special ancient habitat, much older than most of the rest of Florida because the rest has been underwater. Like if you go down to the national park, the Everglades National Park, that habitat's only been sitting there for like 5,000 years. This has been sitting here for at least 1 million years, probably a few million years. So it gives you an idea of how cool this place is. And of course, we have all kinds of interesting special animals and things like that. So that's kind of what is the scrub, right? It's this interesting rare habitat, but I'm gonna go down low here. I think that one of the best ways to understand the scrub is to get low, because the scrub doesn't have a big canopy. It doesn't have trees overhead. It doesn't have big hills or things like that. So to really understand it, you've got to get down on the ground, just like the animals here, like a gopher tortoise or a snake would do. And once you get down here, all of a sudden you are in a wonderland. And it's amazing. I'm looking around, I'm seeing all kinds of things. I'm seeing here's a little poop, maybe from a rabbit or something right there. I'm seeing decomposing leaves. Look at this. I've got a cactus right next to me here. Prickly pear cactus. And oh man, this plant right next to me here is called a spike moss. And it is a really ancient, here's some right here too. It's a really ancient type of plant that actually doesn't have seeds. It has spores, like a fern would have. So I love getting down low like this. The other thing I see are some insects, little insects moving around all over the place. So here's your first question for you. What does Archbold have more of than any other site known in all of the United States? What do we have more than any other place in the United States? I'm giving you a hint here. It has to do with insects. Put it in the chat if you've got an idea. I'll give you another hint. Here at Archbold, we've been surveying the insects here for decades and decades. And we have a guy named Dr. Mark Darup, who's been here since like 1983, I think. And he has collected something like 5,000 specimens a year. He's discovered a bunch of new species. And he is a world expert on this type of insect. And if you study this insect, the type of science is called myrmecology. Ants, yes, I was hoping someone would get it. Archbold has 128 species of ants. When you talk to people about ants, usually they're only thinking of like, 3 kinds, 4 kinds. People know fire ants and they know sugar ants, and that's kind of about it. But we have 128 species of ants at Archbold. There's no other site in all of the United States where they know of that many species of ants. Florida has 239 species of ants, which is a lot. That's more than any other state on the East Coast. And it's still a lot, even though there's some out west that have more than us. It's a lot of ants. So when you're thinking about the scrub, one of the big things is, how do you make a living in the scrub when it is very hot? There's not a lot of shade, because you can see above me, not much shade. What you do is you go underground. So what I'm going to focus on today mostly is thinking about the sand and things on the ground. So we've got a video, and this is about some researchers who came here to look at ants. And the video doesn't really have any narration, but check out what they're doing here. This is very cool. It's like 2.5 minutes, I think. Okay, ready? Good, keep going. Keep going. It's all right.
Yeah, it took all that zinc, huh?
Yeah. Well, hopefully we get something out of it. Even if it's just a chamber.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what these nests look like in real life.
Yeah.
Whew, it's hot on this side.
Great. I just think that is so cool. I remember when they came here and did that. So science can look like a lot of things. Sometimes science is collecting insects and counting the different species, identifying what you have out here. Other times it's doing something like pouring molten zinc onto onto an ant colony so you can learn about how they construct their colonies. We are not the only architects. Humans aren't the only architects out there. Ants are great architects. Termites are wonderful architects as well. So science can look like a lot of different things. Keeping with our theme of looking around on the ground, check out what I've got here. Animal tracks. One of my favorite things about giving tours in this area is that there are always some animal tracks on the ground. And when you go to a natural area, it's not like when you watch a nature documentary and you see all, bears and panthers and wolves and all that stuff. To make those, it takes them many, many, many hours or even months of going out, setting up camera traps, all kinds of stuff. For scientists that are studying those animals, usually you don't see them. You might see them on your camera trap if you set a camera out for a month or something. But what you do find is evidence that the animal has been there. It might be poo, scat on the ground. It might be, say, a bear maybe clawed on the side of a pine tree as it was climbing up it. So you've got evidence, but one of the things is animal tracks. So I've got a nice little patch of sand here right next to me, and I brought with me some plaster molds of some of the animal tracks around here. And I'm going to just put this down in the sand like this, pull it out. And if you were walking around here and you came upon this here, I will switch my camera over so you can see this better. You switch it over and you came right here. What do you think this would be? I've got a few of these I want to try out. Test your skills. This is the easiest one I have. So write in the chat if you can think about what it is. It's the size of my hand there. So that's a relatively big track. Notice there's no paws here. We see that this has hooves. This is a deer. Yep, this is a white-tailed deer. What else do I have here? Oh, here's a common one I see a lot. Put that one in there. This one we see does have a paw, and we see kind of long fingers and even a little claw at the end of the long fingers. What could this one be? It's almost human-like. I see a guess there for raccoon. A couple people are saying raccoon. Let's see, I'm gonna flip it over. Raccoon! Good job. All right, let me clear this out. What else do I have? This one isn't quite as common as a raccoon, but I do see this around here too. It has a circular feel to it. We can see the paw pads there. But you know what you don't see on this one is claws. We don't see any claws on this one because it's a bobcat. And cats can sheath their claws. So you don't usually see any claws on a cat trap. And I do have a coyote one. I'm going to put it right next to it so you can see the difference between a dog and a bobcat. See right here, we actually see the nails from the coyote here, and you don't see that on the bobcat. You also notice that the coyote is not quite as circular as the bobcat is. let's see, I've got one more. And this one is like winning the lottery when you see this one. This is a big one. What could this be? This is the most exciting track that we have in Florida, I would say, personally. It's pretty big. We don't see claws. A little bit round like a cat. This one is pretty big, so sometimes people might confuse this with a bear even. It's a bobcat, or sorry, it's a panther. This one, I'm gonna switch back here. This one's a Florida panther, which is an endangered species in Florida. Here's what it looks like. And we actually just at Archbold just started in November a new research lab here that is going to study panthers and bears. It's studying large mammals, predator and prey, and it's really, the project is really focused on thinking about how all the different lands in Florida are connected, because those big animals need a lot of space. So that's pretty exciting for us to have a whole new research lab. That doesn't happen very often. So that gives you an idea of some of the animals that live out here, and that maybe the next time you're walking around in the sand, take a good look at the sand, because you can see all kinds of different tracks. And little pamphlets like this is really helpful. You know, it's got the tracks right on there for you. So I really highly recommend getting something like this. All right, we're gonna do something a little different right now. Instead of cutting to another video, have I seen panther tracks? Oh yeah, I've seen panther tracks here. Not something you see every day. I've seen them 2 or 3 times in the 8 years I've been here. But I'm also not traveling all around the property all the time. I'm usually in the same loop or two that I do tours on. But we don't have any female panthers living here, but we do have a male, once a year or something like that. A male will travel through the area, because the males, they travel through really, really a lot of space. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch back to Margaret, because she has a friend with her in the office today. So I think she's gonna run over to her other computer actually to do this.
Yes. Hopefully you all can see me. I have one of our friends that lives in our office here. It's one of our education snakes. Her name is Miss Poser. I'll move closer a little bit. This is her. Does anybody want to guess what type of snake she is? Any guesses? Oh, bull snake, that's a good guess. This is a Florida native snake as well, just another helpful hint. See if I can get her a little bit closer. Oh, yeah, there she is checking out the camera. I'll go ahead and tell you, she is a Florida pine snake. So she's a native Florida snake. She is found in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. And she is state threatened. And I'll talk about that in a second. But her name is Miss Poser. She's called Miss Poser because Florida pine snakes are not poisonous, but they do have some tricks to help them in the wild seem a little bit more threatening. Sorry, her head's poking in my hair back here. And that is that sometimes she poses as a rattlesnake. So she will fake a rattle. She doesn't actually have a rattle in her tail, but that helps her seem a little bit more threatening in the wild. And Miss Poser is threatened, as I mentioned earlier, in the state of Florida. And the reason for that is because her habitat is that she lives in is no longer as accessible as it was in history. So Florida pine snakes live in 2 different types of habitats. That's either the scrub, so where Dustin and I are right now, or the longleaf pine forest. Unfortunately, about 85% of the scrub has been lost, and about 97% of longleaf pine forests have been lost. So there really is very, very little space for pine snakes to be living in the wild. We are super, super lucky to have her. We have a permit to do it, and it's cool to have such a fun and rare snake here. They do live around in this area in Archbold. I've never seen one, but they like to hang out in gopher tortoise burrows, which are keystone species in this area. And I know a few people that have seen them on site. Poser, we feed her, we feed her small frozen rats here. She doesn't have to hunt for her food, but in the wild, she'd be eating really anything that she could wrap her jaw around. So that might be mice, small bunnies, other small snakes, really anything little. And she does constrict, so she will wrap herself around something and suffocate it to eat it. Obviously, she would never do that to me. That's like going into the forest yourself and seeing a bear and thinking that looks really easy to eat in one bite. Obviously, we don't think that, and she doesn't think that about humans. So this is Miss Poser. Dustin, do you have anything to add?
Awesome. Thanks, Margaret. That was so cool. I think that was a fun idea that Margaret had to do that. And those of you who have been here for field trips in the past, Miss Poser is the best part of the field trip. When we ask kids what do they like the most, it's hard to compete with a Florida pine snake. I do want to talk a little bit more about how science works and mention how did I know all those facts about ants? Because of Mark Dayrup's book that he published in 2017 about ants in Florida. So part of science is making observations. And that's what science is rooted in, is making observations. But it's also about sharing your observations with other scientists and having healthy discussions and sometimes disagreeing with the other scientists about your observations and about the conclusions you're drawing from them. So that's a big part of science too. The other thing I want to show you here is something you don't always see in the scrub. But we have some logs here from dead trees, and I've got a couple of these near me. And if you ever find something like this, there's a good chance that there's going to be some bugs underneath it. I'm hoping for some termites, and I don't know what else could be under there, but I'm hoping for some termites. I do have my macro lens on my camera right now, so I can switch it over and we'll have a magnification on this. And I did bring a spoon here, so I'm gonna flip this over and try to see if there's something I can grab with my spoon, and then if I get something, we'll take a closer look. So let's see if I can flip it over. Okay, let's see. Oh, cool. All right, now this fall back on. This is not a termite. This is something else here. Get it. Lift it up here. Okay. It's I don't know what species exactly, but see this kind of goober? Got a slug right here. Slug's kind of like a snail without a case. You see this slug was just living happy under here. And slugs, their bodies can dry out pretty easily, so it's nice and moist underneath a rotting log. And I can see his antennas sticking out. All right, I'm gonna put him back. And did we see any termites? They probably all ran away while I was doing that. When we flip the next one over, I'm hoping we can get a termite for you to see here. Termite. No, I'm gonna try one more time. Oh, that one's too big for me to flip. But if I just scrounge a little bit. Oops, that's all right. I just scrounge a little in here. Might find some. There's lots of little roots everywhere. Lots of little roots everywhere. Oh man. Okay, well, it looks like they all ran away from me. But we still have that slug over there. Let's take a little bit of a Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the slug. I've never looked at a slug with a macro lens before, so this should be interesting. Let's get up close. Oh, yeah. Oh, look at it. That's how it sees. See that little, it's not exactly an antenna. I forget what they call them. Ocular appendage that it can go out, and then if it's scared, it can stick it back inside. They don't have noses. They're vegetarian. Wow. Yeah, it's got a lot of mucus. They secrete a lot of mucus. And sometimes you can, if they were traveling over something dry, you'll see the mucus they leave behind. Remember, they need to try to stay wet. It can't dry out. See if I can get its eyeballs in there again. I don't think it's gonna stick them out. I don't know what kind of species this is. It's not the real common one. I'm gonna flip back here. The real common one we have is the, what is it called? The leather leaf, the Florida leather leaf, I think is what it's called. And that's not it. So I don't know what kind that is. That's pretty cool. All right, we're getting towards the end of the time here, and the next thing I want to talk about is actually not the scrub, but it has to do with our guest that's coming on. So Dr. Joan Morrison studies a bird called the crested caracara. It's not a scrub bird, but the scrub a lot of times will be nearby prairie. So this video is shot with Dr. Joan, and she sometimes works at Buck Island. I'm not sure if this was actually shot at Buck Island or not. Check it out. It's about 5 minutes long, and then she'll come on and answer questions.
I've been studying the bird here in Florida for 20 years, and I've learned a lot about its breeding biology and movements and home range and social patterns and behaviors, and but they never cease to surprise me with something. We're at Archbold Biological Station on the reserve property, which is a lot of improved pasture, which is the habitats that the caracaras really like, and in fact prefer this kind of habitat. And we were trying this morning to capture an adult to put a cellular transmitter on it so that we could track its movements and see where it's going, and also test the transmitter, see how well the bird responds to it. But it's windy this morning, and that isn't helpful, and we didn't have any luck. So no bird this morning.
It seemed to be timed right, but mine needs to be...
Not bad. His didn't come all the way down though.
Well, caracaras are native to Florida. A lot of people don't realize that. They've been here for a couple million years, probably Pleistocene times, because they also occur in Texas and Arizona, and probably at one time were sort of contiguous around the southern part of the continent. And then the sea levels came up after the Pleistocene, and various populations were isolated, and Florida's population is now isolated here. Yeah, that's very cool. Oh yeah, we know that. Well, this is a bird that's in captivity at a place called Treasure Coast Wildlife Center over near Fort Pierce. And we keep her because sometimes she helps us attract the wild birds to come in. She's a full adult. Full adults have the yellow legs and the orange-yellow face and the darker brown-black plumage. And we're also trying to teach her to stand on the glove so she could be an education bird. She needs to be able to stand up and behave herself so that we can take her to schools and let kids look at her and understand caracaras and understand that they're part of native wildlife here. In my dissertation research, I found that the caracaras really use this pasture habitat, this improved pasture habitat. They really like this habitat. They get along well with cattle and cattle ranches and all the activities associated with that. And they're generalist feeders. They typically walk around on the ground a lot, not like many raptors that tend to kill things with their feet. They walk around and they eat bugs, and they walk in the ditches and find frogs and fish, and they eat insects that are in cow pies. They flip cow pies over to get the insects underneath. So they're really well suited to these pastures, and the pastures are really well suited to them. And so it's a nice relationship between cattle ranching and a native Florida wildlife species. Florida's population is listed as fairly threatened because of habitat loss, and also at the state level it's threatened. On the MacArthur Agroecology Research Center, there's actually quite a few pairs there because that's primarily cattle ranching. This habitat is disappearing in Florida. It's being converted to sugarcane for ethanol, to housing developments, to row crops, other uses that are not the kinds of places where caracaras like to live. And since the population here is isolated, it's like a bunch of birds being in a fishbowl, and the fishbowl just gets smaller and smaller with the same number of birds in it, and pretty soon there's extra birds that don't have habitat, they can't find places to breed, and so they're very habitat restricted here. The pairs stay on their territories all year. We know that from the telemetry work. And they maintain the same territories. They pretty much nest in the same tree year after year, so this pair would probably use this tree again. Well, one of the things that helps you find nests actually is looking in the palm trees, but then when you look below the nest, you might see all this whitewash, which is from the young birds. When they're in the nest, they fling their feces over the side. And then they also regurgitate all these pellets that you can find that help you know that there's a nest there. And these are what the birds regurgitate of the parts of the animals that they can't eat. And so they're like owl pellets, and they have fur, and here's a bone of some mammal probably, and insect parts. They eat everything. They do catch live prey. They eat mice and small rodents and nestling birds and bigger birds and cattle egrets and insects and snakes and all kinds of reptiles and amphibians, turtles, carrion of all types. Some people think that they kill cattle or kill calves, which is not true. First of all, the calves are way bigger than a caracara, and a caracara as a scavenger would never take on something that big that was alive. Scavengers are very wary of anything that might hurt them. Oftentimes when people think that, they come upon vultures and caracaras on a carcass after a calf has already died. They're very smart and they're very wary. And I guess they've had to be like that, getting along with people. They've had to learn how to deal with all the activities that people do, like cattle ranching and burning and driving around and things like that, but they adapt pretty well to people as long as they don't get persecuted by shooting or poisoning or non-factual information. If left to be out in these cattle ranches, they just do fine. And so we continue with the work now after 20 years. Some of the questions we really want to focus on are what happens to the birds when their habitat gets converted, and that's why we're using these new transmitters to try to figure out how to answer some of those questions.
Oh, that was great. I had the pleasure actually this weekend of getting to go out and with Joan and watch her trap a caracara and put a GPS backpack on it, which was really cool, very cool. And we're lucky to have her today with us. She's at Archbold's Buck Island Ranch. She's staying there for a few weeks or so working on a caracara project. So we're going to go and move into the question and answer phase. But if your schedule means you've got to move on to your next thing, then it was wonderful to see you. And hopefully I'll see you again next week, my friends. Hasta pronto, amigos. And we'll be back again next Tuesday. So Joan, if you're there, you can stick your video on and say hello. And it might take us a minute to get her connected here.
There we are. Hope that works.
Yeah,
Can you see me?
yeah. Yep.
Okay, good. Okay.
So, Margaret, do we have any
Enjoy the video.
questions?
Hi, yes, we do. And I also thought I would just show that I had intentions of putting Poser away. She has wrapped herself through my shirt, and so she will be joining us for the Q&A today because it's really hard to take a snake out of a shirt when they don't want to leave. So she'll be hanging out with us. Questions that we have, let's see. Alrighty, we have, when do caracara nest?
Caracaras nest in what would be considered the Florida winter, which is right now. This is kind of the peak of their nesting season. And sometimes they start making nests as early as October in the fall. And sometimes they can even have nests as late as April and May. So they have a pretty long breeding season. And sometimes pairs can even make 2 nests in the same year, which is pretty unusual for a big raptor.
Awesome. And then also, the Riley family is wondering, what are caracaras related to? They look like hawks with very long legs.
That's a good question, because the taxonomy of birds, or how birds are classified by different genus and species and what family they're in, has really been changing a lot lately, because we're doing all this new genetic work. We have all these cool new genetic tools that help us decide where in the classification tree various animals and plants belong. So caracaras right now are considered to be falcons, which means they're related somewhat to peregrine falcons and American kestrels, which you can see around here pretty easily, and blins and prairie falcons. Those are all considered falcons. And the caracaras are in that family, but they're kind of in their own subfamily. They're a little bit different. And so there's 9 species of caracaras, and they're in their own little group of a subfamily within the falcon family.
Awesome. Have you traveled elsewhere to see other caracara species or populations?
I have. I'm currently working on some caracaras in Arizona. They also live there. There's a small, not isolated, but not a very large population in Arizona that we don't know much about. So I'm working on those. There are caracaras in Texas. I've seen them there, but I haven't studied them. And the population in Texas is actually increasing. There are quite a few caracaras in Texas. I've seen them in Chile, where I've worked on another species down there, and to a couple other places in South and Central America where I've seen some other caracara species. So they're all really cool birds, and not much study. There's a lot of opportunity out there for young scientists to get interested in caracaras and maybe do some work in the future.
Awesome. And a question more for Dustin is, what is the most common species of ant at Archbold?
Oh my, I don't know. The most common species of ant. I'll have to try to get back to you on that one. Like I said, there's a lot of different species of ants. There are some rare ones. The ant that was in that video is a rare ant. And some of the species that we have only been seen like a few times. So what ones are super common? Definitely fire ants. Those are, there's the invasive fire ant. Hopefully that's not the most common kind. But I'll try to find out. And email people who are registered through Zoom.
And back, we have a few more caracara questions coming in now. First of all, do they migrate?
Actually, no. Caracaras are resident raptors. They don't migrate out of Florida at all during the year. They stay on their territories year round. The young birds travel sort of around Florida pretty widely, up as far as Orlando and as far south as the northern boundary of Big Cypress, but they never leave the state, and they don't migrate away like a lot of other birds do. And they don't migrate out of Texas or Arizona either, at least as far as we know.
And then also with their habitat, is the pasture habitat that caracaras like, is that natural for them, or is it only created by ranchers?
We don't have historic information, again, because nobody was around in the Pleistocene to know that, but presumably caracaras that were here at that time lived in prairie, and prairie is also a wide open grassland habitat that was maintained by fire, and during the Pleistocene by really big grazing animals like bison and sloths and probably larger early relatives of cattle that lived here in Florida. And they kept the prairie grasslands in a very similar condition to what the ranchers are like now. The grasses were wide open and very short and continually maintained by those grazing and fire activities. So people are mimicking those activities now with the ranching, but it's pretty much the same structure as it would have been historically.
Joan, can you just define Pleistocene for the guests?
Well, Pleistocene was what we considered the last ice age, which started about 2 to 3 million years ago and finished up actually around 10 to 12,000 years ago when the big ice sheets that covered most of North America began to melt and retreat. And during that time, when the glaciers were finally melting, there were lots of large animals here in North America that are no longer here, giant sloths and mastodons and mammoths and things like that. And a lot of other large birds, large caracaras. If you ever get a chance to go to Los Angeles, visit the La Brea Tar Pits Museum, because you'll see in there a caracara relative, historically, a skeleton of one that's about 6 feet tall. Pretty scary, really big caracara that must have lived in the Pleistocene at that time. And we have reason to believe that there were some other early caracaras living in Florida during that time too that were certainly a lot bigger than they are now. So that's pretty cool too.
And do we know how many caracara are in our local population?
We don't. Counting wildlife of any species really is pretty tough. I think the people at Archbold have a pretty good idea about how many scrub jays there are because the population is right there and they have a lot of biologists going out and counting them. But it's hard to count animals in the wild, and especially if you don't know the individuals. You know, the only way we would know an individual was different from another one is if they had a band or a transmitter. And so counting every single caracara out there is pretty much impossible. So we really don't know that information right now. And so what we try to do is keep track of the nesting territories so that we know that maybe the same number of nesting territories is still occurring, or maybe there are fewer nesting territories, which might suggest fewer birds, but we don't really know how many there are.
Joan, if I could just add to that, part of that is that many of them live on private lands, right? Isn't that part of it? So there's no biologist there to count them on somebody's ranch.
Right, right. The ranchers may know, but if the biologist can't go on there to count them, then we don't know how many live there. So that's true. We can't always access the places where they are.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I had a snake caught up in my mouse, not a real mouse, but the mouse for the computer, and she made it impossible for me to unmute myself. Another question is, do they have any natural predators?
That's another good question. It turns out that the adults probably don't have any natural predators except maybe humans. For a time, they were often shot and poisoned. But the young birds, the baby birds, especially when they're really small, like right after they hatch, they can be preyed upon by raccoons, by snakes, by crows, by eagles even. There are many more eagles now in Florida than there were when I was here back in the 90s. And so the predators are mostly on the very young birds when they're just hatched and maybe for the first few weeks of their life, but not so much on the adults. Although the adults and the young ones too get run over by cars, and that's a major cause of mortality of caracaras in Florida is death by vehicle collision.
That's sad. Sorry, I just had to run. The snake is now back in her enclosure. That'll make it easier for me to answer questions. Do they use cropland areas as their habitat?
It depends on the crop. Most of the time when they use croplands, it's after the crops have been harvested, or for example, after the sugarcane has been burned. When that occurs, a lot of the little mammals and reptiles and things running around in the sugarcane fields get burned up. And so there's a lot of, or else get exposed when the soil is exposed. And so that's when the caracaras and vultures come to those areas to eat the animals that got burned in the fire or got plowed up by the disking or by the plowing. But they don't use the crop fields when the crops are in there. And a lot of the concern about that too is the chemicals that may be used on the crops that would be dangerous for the caracaras.
And Vicky asked, I've seen caracara in Inglewood. Where do you think they live in that area?
I don't know where Inglewood is. Could you give me a little bit better context?
I'm not
What is it
entirely
near?
sure myself. If Vicky wants to share. Hopefully she can comment that in the chat and we will get back to that question. The next question is, how long do they live?
Oh, that's a great question. We now have the longevity record, which means the record for a wild bird living in the wild, abandoned in 1996, that was recovered, I believe, just last year, or maybe the year before. And when I banded it, it was an adult, which means it was at least 3. And so if you do the math, the bird was at least 27 years old. And that's our record at this point for a wild bird, 27 years. That's a long time for a raptor to be alive. But we have another one that lived for 24 years at least. So they can live a long time.
Wow, that's longer than I expected. Vicky has clarified that Inglewood is southwest coast, south of Venice.
South of Venice. Well, it doesn't help me a whole lot either, but I'll try. You can see them sort of in this whole south central part of Florida. If you drive around and look for open pastures, anything with cattle, palm trees, they like to nest in palm trees, so you might see some habitat near that area where they would be. Sometimes the young birds that are wandering widely around Florida could show up sort of anywhere. They might be in those pastures or they might be in an agricultural field. But that's the kind of place you would most likely see them, any place that looked like a pasture or an open grassy area.
And the Riley family wants to know, how do caracaras interact with turkey vultures for scavenging?
Oh, that's another good carcass out there. All the carrion feeders are obviously trying to get in there and get their share, right? So sometimes they squabble. Sometimes depends kind of on who gets there first. The caracaras in the morning are usually flying very early along roads and things to find carrion. And the vultures don't show up quite so early because they have to wait till there's a little bit of wind so they can soar and fly on the air currents. So sometimes the caracaras show up, but then when the vultures come to a carrion, then sometimes there's fighting, and sometimes the caracaras throw their head back and make this really weird rattling noise. If you go on the All About Bird site, you can hear that noise and see that behavior. It's really cool. And sometimes they jump around and kind of threaten each other. I actually saw a caracara punch a vulture in the face with its foot one day. I saw a caracara jump on the tail of a vulture one time to try to make it go away from a carcass. So they do interact, and sometimes it's pretty fun to watch those interactions, kind of like maybe kids fighting over a cookie or something like that.
Okay,
I wanted to add for Vicky's question about the caracara. Vicky, if you haven't heard of the website called eBird, it's an app and a website that's put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Actually, the All About Birds that Joan just mentioned is also from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it is populated with observations from people. So birders, they'll make all these lists of, I saw this bird, this bird, this bird, and they put it into the app with a location. So if you're wondering where any bird is, you can open up, it's free to use, E, like the letter E, bird, and type in caracara, and you'll see exactly where people are seeing these.
Yeah, you can do that and zoom into the state of Florida, into the area that you're living or where you're concerned about, and get real details about where people have seen them.
There are a few non-caracara questions. And one of them is, why do scrub jays eat acorns?
Well, I could do that one, or Joan, do you want to do that one?
No, you can do that one.
They eat acorns in the winter because there's not a lot else to eat. It's not like it's their favorite tasting food. They'd rather eat some grasshoppers. But in the winter, even though the winter is still pretty green in Florida, you don't have the insect abundance that you have other times of the year. So in the fall, they take the acorns, which are very bitter. They have a lot of tannin in them, like a bitter tea, and they bury them in the sand. And the longer that they're in their sand, actually the better they'll taste, because the tannins will slowly seep out of the acorn. And then they've got food to eat ready. It's like if your family cans food in the fall from the harvest, then you've got food to eat in the winter.
And another question is, what do snakes eat? I can answer part of this, is that at least for Poser here, she is eating frozen mice that we keep in a freezer. And then in the wild, she'd be eating basically anything that she can fit in her jaw / kind of the middle section of her body, as her jaw can expand a little bit. And that's going to be small mammals, small reptiles, I guess kind of anything that snake could get its hands on. I feel like a good rule of thumb for most snakes is that they have to be able to wrap their mouth around what they're eating, but I can't speak for every single snake. Dustin, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the scrub jays around here definitely get eaten by snakes. And birds, if you think about it, an adult bird, almost all bird species can fly, but their little chicks in the nest can't fly. So a lot of birds, baby birds, get eaten by snakes, and that is just part of nature. You know, that's as long as it's a native species of snake that's been in that ecosystem with them for thousands of years, there's balance there. The problem is if you have invasive species like the Burmese python that comes in, then that just starts eating everything because it doesn't have natural predators and it's not part of that ecosystem. Um, but yeah, snake will eat whatever it can eat, whatever it can fit in its mouth. And sometimes you can see like a little bulge after it eats. You can see a little bulge depending on how big the item is that it ate.
Another question is, how long have we had Miss Poser? And I actually am not sure about this, Dustin.
Well, she's 18 years old, and we've had her for most of that. I don't know exactly when we got her. I've been here for 8 years, and she was here long before me. Archbold has had several snakes over the years in for our education office, and we do have another one, Mr. Pinky. And Mr. Pinky's in his late 20s. He's like 27 or something like that. So that's a really old snake. 18 is a good age for a snake. If Miss Poser was a human, she might be 65 years old or something like that.
And are there any poisonous animals at Archbold?
Poisonous. Well, we do have some venomous snakes here. I think that might be what they're getting at. There's some venomous snakes here. You could have a rattlesnake, pygmy rattlesnake, or a diamondback rattlesnake, though they're pretty rare in the scrub. I've never seen one out here. I have seen coral snakes, which are a venomous snake. I've seen them a couple of times at Archbold. And then when you get into the insects and all of that, I mean, a lot of them are using chemicals to capture their prey, but we're too big for them to do anything to. So, you know, spiders and ants and things like that have chemicals, but we're too big for them to hurt.
Another question is, why are scrub jays called scrub jays?
Well, it's actually a good name. Scrub jays live in the scrub habitat. And there's different scrub jays. There's some out west, out in California, Mexico, Texas. But then there's the Florida scrub jay is the one we study, and it's only found in Florida, in the Florida scrub. So it's a pretty good name for it.
Have there been any pythons documented at Archbold?
Not yet. We're thankful of that, and hopefully they won't make it up here. Hopefully they'll stay where, well, we don't want them where they are either in Florida because they're causing problems, but hopefully they won't get up here.
And I'm going to do 2 more questions. So the first one is, are there any bullet ants here?
I don't think so. Bullet ants. I think those are in the rainforest. Those are those super painful ones, I think, right? Is where you can like watch, you know, videos of like people on YouTube getting bit by ants that hurt a lot. There's a guy that does that. I forget his name, but he does that. I don't think we have bullet ants here.
Alrighty, and then the last question is, why do some trees need fire? And I think we can add on and ask, why is that important for caracaras as well?
All right, well, Joan, you can take
I'm
that.
sorry, typing. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was typing an answer here.
Oh, you're fine. Why do some trees need fire? And why is that important for caracaras as well?
Fire, some trees need fire in the scrubs, or the trees that are dependent on fire to have the fire to open up their cones to release the seeds. But in the prairie where the caracaras live, the fire keeps the grasses healthy by kind of regenerating them after the fire is over. They grow much more vigorously, but it also keeps the grasses lower so that they don't grow up too high or the habitat doesn't become full of trees and scrub, in which case then habitat wouldn't be very suitable for caracaras. So fire is important in the prairies to keep the grasslands low and wide open.
Yeah, I think one thing that's when you're trying to understand habitats in Florida, one thing to know is that almost all of the land in Florida burns at some point, or it used to anyways, before we put roads and ditches in and stuff. So the communities of plants and the ecosystems, they're all used to it because it's been burning here for so many thousands or maybe even millions of years. So if you take out, it'd be like all of a sudden changing the climate in an area or something like that. A fire is such a regular part of the ecosystem that if you removed it, it has huge changes. So it's not like Florida will no longer be green or have nature in it, but the habitats would change dramatically if fire is, and we've seen that. I mean, that's what happens. Take fire out and the habitat changes a lot. And the species that are more of the rare or special species to the area are the ones that are, and most in need of that fire, and are lost when it's gone. There's always going to be raccoons and cockroaches, right? But those special things like caracara would be lost.
Alrighty, I think that's all
Scrub
we have
dates, too.
time for questions today. If there are any unanswered questions that we missed, or if there are any questions that we need to maybe do some research on first, we will be emailing you all later, and we will have all that information in there as well. Dustin, do you have anything to add?
I just really appreciate everybody joining us today. And Margaret, I really liked doing the snake demo. Maybe we'll do that again and add some other snake facts in there. Joan, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, hope to see you all next Tuesday.
Yep. Thank you all.